Remember when we were kids and our parents used to buy clothes for us? Many a times parents used to just go ahead and buy clothes for us without even asking us what we really like or what we really need. Why? Because we did not know what we wanted at the time. And many a times would get maybe a size 8 when in actual fact you were just a size 7. Why? Because our parents knew that if they asked us, sometimes we would even say size 6 when we need a size 7. Why? Because we did not know what exactly we wanted. And similarly, when it comes to cars, most of us do not know, is it better for me to import my car or to buy locally? And today in this video, I'm going to answer all those questions, because today we're going to be comparing, is it better for you to buy a car locally or to import a car? I am jdmzim, and thank you so much for tuning into Zimcars, where we get to give you the best of the best in terms of car buying advice and car advice in general. If it's your first time kuskapana, please don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel so that keep on getting more and of course more of the good stuff. And can I get first time kuskapana, please don't forget to like, share and subscribe and press on that notification bell so that whenever we upload a new video, you will be the first one to get notified. I do on point when we upload a new video. First point, the key differences between importing. Importing is often cheaper than buying locally. How does it get cheaper? Because all of these cars that we have, even those that we buy locally, are cars that have been imported by those dealers. So generally, they are bound to put a markup, because those dealers are doing business. And when you're doing business, you just import something or you just buy something, add the markup and sell it. So generally, importing cars is bound to be cheaper than buying locally. That's the main difference between these two methods. So if you are considering buying locally, know that that car is bound to have a slight markup, or sometimes an even huge markup, depending on the availability of that car in the market. Why? Because if I'm the only one with that product in the market, I would give you a greater markup. Why? Because I know I'm the only person who has that product on the market. So that's a point to consider, and that's the main thing to consider, that buying locally tends to be more expensive than importing. And then the second point is now the condition of the car, because that car is being imported from maybe Japan, maybe any country in the world. It's bound to be in better condition. Why? Because it's coming to Zimbabwe as a second hand, as opposed to getting a car in Zimbabwe. Some of these cars might be third hand, fourth hand. They might have been used for quite some time in Zimbabwe, and most people don't want those cars. Why? Because most people in Zimbabwe have a reputation of not maintaining their cars as much as the people that are in Japan or in other countries do. Why? Because generally things are slightly more things to do with cars in Zimbabwe are slightly more expensive than they are in other countries. Why? Because in other countries, those parts, those replacement parts, and even those cars are cheaper to buy than in Zimbabwe. And some of those guys buy those cars brand new, so they get warranties there. And generally, those cars, if you buy a car brand new, you are bound, not to add as much depreciation as a person who buys that car second hand. So generally, importing a car, you get a car that is much better in terms of its condition than buying locally. That's the second point to consider. Third point, immediate availability. Now we get to a slight advantage of buying locally. When you buy a car locally, you know that you are buying a car immediately. The moment that you pay and finish your deal, that's the moment that when you get your car, as opposed to getting importing a car whereby you need to wait a period of like 6 months waiting for your car to arrive in Zimbabwe, and then a few days to get it registered in Zimbabwe, as opposed to just buying locally. Sometimes you get a car that has been registered already. It might just take you like an hour or less for you to finish a deal if you are buying locally. So in terms of buying locally, the major advantage is you get your car konapo, as opposed to importing whereby you need to wait for 6 months waiting for a car to come to Zimbabwe. And then moving on, customs and duty. Most people don't really understand issues to do with customs and duty. So when you buy a car locally, the price that you're told by the seller is the final price that you pay for the car, as opposed to getting a car from outside the country, whereby you need to consider issues like duty and the customs and duty, and also transport cost, whereby you need to transport that car from wherever you've bought it to Zimbabwe. So you need to consider all those things, and most people usually don't know how to calculate duty. So most people end up just buying locally for the ease and the peace of mind. You won't have to meet some costs that you never had budgeted for. Most people to leave their cars at borders, at border posts, as you consider borders, auction. So you need to make sure that you really understand the whole process and all the costs that are required from you during the importation period, or during the importation process of getting your car from maybe Japan to Zimbabwe. You need to make sure that you know all these costs. And then moving on, scams and risk. This is one of the major disadvantages of importing. Sometimes you will get scammed, and the risks of you failing to pay enough duty or not understanding duty, resulting in that car being impounded and eventually getting auctioned to other people. So you might even lose all of your money trying to import a vehicle, as opposed to just buying locally, whereby you just go to a dealership, pay your money, get your car, and go straight home with your car. So you need to also consider that when you are buying a car locally, scams are really less. Why? Because you can just go straight to the dealership and deal with the person face to face, as opposed to dealing with someone online. Sometimes you might be scammed, by a person masquerading as a seller of a car, whereas they're just trying to scam you of your hard-earned money. So you need to make sure that you really understand, you really verify and understand the sites that you're buying your cars from. Most people buy from B4, but the other sites that sell these second-hand cars online. So you need to make sure that you really know and you really verify that you are buying from a trusted and credible site online. And then moving on to number 6, car choice and variety. So buying locally, you get fewer choices. Why? Because we are dealing with dealerships that usually have like 50 cars only, and 50 cars of across all models and all makes. So imagine you want a Honda Fit, or maybe you want a green Honda Fit, and you're dealing with a dealership that only has like 2 or 3 Honda Fits, and you also not get a chance to really check for everything and really get a perfect car when you are buying locally, because the variety or the selection is limited, as opposed to buying online or buying from outside the country, whereby you will get a chance to choose from a variety of cars, a variety of mileages, a variety of transmissions, a variety of even colors. So you need to make sure you consider that. If you're buying a car locally, the variety and the range of selection is very slim, as opposed to importing. So that's another point to consider when you are buying a car from outside the country. And number 7, service history. If you are importing a car, you might get full service history, as opposed to buying locally. One time I was telling people on my TikTok, by the way, please go ahead and follow me on TikTok at Zimcars, so that you get some quick advice, because I put some short format content on that TikTok account. I was telling people that you need to make sure that you keep your service history. And most people were saying, why would I keep a service history for a Honda Fit? Why would I keep service history for my small car? The service history is for bigger cars, it's for more expensive cars. But really, service history is for every car. So if you want a car that has full service history, a car that was being maintained properly, and a car that has proof that it was being maintained properly, you need to consider importing a car. Why? Because you might get a full service history from the probability of you getting a service history from cars in Japan, as opposed to getting full service history from cars in Zimbabwe. There's a greater possibility that you get it with imported cars from Japan than from local cars. So you need to also consider that if you're looking for a car, that if you're looking for proof that the car was being maintained properly, you need to get a car from outside the country. You need to import a car. And then moving on to point number 8. So if you want a car that is stock, a car that has not been tampered with, a car that has not been removed much of it, to people that you do have driven, or have owned BMW E90, they know they have something called a valvetronic sensor, if I'm not mistaken, that is usually removed by local mechanics, because it's quite a tricky part to service. So most mechanics just remove it from the system altogether. So if you want a car that has not been tampered with, a car that has not been modded, you need to make sure that you get a car that you import a car instead, because most of these cars that you import, especially from Japan, are cars that have not been touched. They are cars that come stock most of the time. They are cars that have not been pimped, cars that have not been tampered with. So if you are looking for a car that is stock, a car that is in the closest possible condition that it walked from the dealership from dealership to the roads, you need to consider importing a car. Why? Because most of these cars that we get from Japan come as stock. Mota or something. So you need to make sure that you import a car if you consider getting a car that is stock, that is the best possible condition, or that is the nearest condition to how it rolled off from the production line. So you need to make sure that you import if you consider that. And then number 9, payment option. When you are importing now, most of the time you need a full payment when you're importing a car, as opposed to when you are buying a car locally. You might get deals whereby you pay 5,000 for a car that is 10,000, and then you pay the other remaining amount in installments. It's possible in some dealerships according to the deals that you will get. But when you're importing, you need to make sure that you have the full amount for duty, the full amount for the car, the full amount for the transportation. So make sure that if you are considering importing, you have your full amount, you have the full amount of every payment that you need to make. Why? Because those guys usually need their money up front. It's cash up front, as opposed to the possibility of getting better deals when you are locally, when you're buying locally. So you need to make sure that you consider that. But generally, in terms of the car market in Zimbabwe, everything is done cash up front. If you're buying a car, you need to pay cash up front. If you're importing a car, you also need to pay cash up front. So that's not really an advantage of buying locally, because we don't have those kinds of deals after all in Zimbabwe. It's very rare to find a deal whereby you can pay, let's say for example, for a car that is 8,000, you can pay even 6,000 and left with and get pay the balance in 2-3 months. It's very rare to get those kinds of deals. So you need to consider that when you're buying a car, whether importing or buying locally, you just need to have your full amount for you not to kutuzozvipinza among madiri that are not so nice. And then moving on to number 10, resale value. When you are importing a car, you are the first owner locally, so it's literally sort of a new car in Zimbabwe. So it gets a better resale value than a car that you've bought in Zimbabwe, which might be on the 3rd or even sometimes on the 5th hand. So you need to make sure that you consider resale value when you're buying your car. It takes time to import, but it also has a benefit of the best possible resale value. Why? Because you are the first owner of that car in this market, and most people would consider buying a car from a first hand than buying a car from the 3rd hand or the 5th hand. So make sure that you consider all of this. But generally, what are we saying? When you are importing a car, you get when you're importing a car, you get a better quality car generally. Sometimes you might get a recent import in Zimbabwe, but the best recent import is the recent import that you really know this is a recent import, because some of these dealerships, they lie that this car is a recent import, whereas that car maybe might just have been changed, the number plate, or sometimes it has been in Zimbabwe for like 5 years. Someone has been using it and then they just change the number plate and tell you that it's a recent import. So you need to make sure that you understand all of this. The only downside of importing is you might get scammed, number one. But if you get a good agent, you will not get scammed. You need to wait for 6 months. Most people are impatient when it comes to buying their first cars. When you're buying a first car, you are bound to be impatient. So you need to really consider, should I just rush and buy a car locally, or should I wait and get a good car at a better deal by importing? So you need to also consider that. And then buying locally, sometimes if you go to a good dealership, you might get a good deal after all, and also you might even get a good car. But the downside is you might get a car and you might be the 5th owner of that car, and that car, the other 3 or 2 owners or even 4 owners, you might not know how often and how well they were maintaining that car. So all those problems might be left with you. So you need to make sure that you consider all of this. I am selfpoweredcar, and thank you so much for tuning in. Thanks so much. This is the best of the best when it comes. This channel is the best of the best when it comes to car advice and car buying advice. Until we meet again, always remember that a prayer day keeps the devil away. Don't forget to pray.